Welcome back. So now we're going to shift a little bit. Before we looked at the BGS models, the business, government, society models for understanding the manager's role, and these models all looked at understanding a manager's role within the context of a business and how that related to the external environment. Okay? We're going to start looking at some ontological models of management. Now, these, instead of looking at more or less than the nature of transactions between businesses, managers, workers, and then broader society. So we're not looking as much at transactions, but instead we're looking at almost like ethical or responsibility-based understandings of a manager's role. You could also say that we're looking at a manager's understanding of ethics as they're looking at inside the organization, or in other words, a view of a manager's interpersonal relationships with their followers, but it normally looks at the inside of the organization. These ontologies are also less externally focused. Furthermore, these ontologies that you're going to see in this video and the following 3 videos can also be independent of organizations. In fact, they can be independent of business, government, society. And so for this reason, I'm going to explain each of these ontologies, and then I'm going to compare some of the ideas of these ontologies as it applies to management to some theories that you find outside of management. And this will kind of help you understand different ways of looking at a manager's role within the firm versus this kind of leadership role or political role that's seen outside the firm. So it's designed to help you get better understanding. So the first ontology we're going to look at here is what we call the undifferentiated individual ontology. Now, all of these 4 ontologies start with a 1. Now, this is a 1 with a big O, okay? And that big O means that it's kind of a metaphysical source, or in everyday English, it is a source of moral authority that's going to guide how a manager's interpersonal relationships drive behavior. Okay? So you've got a big 1 here, and then you've got a lot of little ones. That's 1 with a lowercase o. Okay? So what we're saying here in this model, and I know you've all seen this at some point in your working lives, you have got a boss that sees themselves as almost the moral authority of the organization. Now, ideally, they behave in a good, decent, wholesome way, and they look out for their employees. But this can also translate into individuals who have extreme egos, and those egos can translate into them feeling that they are the people or the individuals that define culture and moral authority within an organization, and more importantly, they feel that their role as a manager is to drive this culture where everybody else decides to be like a little mini-me of the big boss. Now, there are a lot of companies that run this way, and a lot of actually other kinds of organizations that run this way. I saw this all the time in the Army. You had the big boss, the colonel, the general, whatever, and people would do everything in their power to try to act like this person, to emulate this person. I mean, they would try to eat the same food as that person. And I mean, there was one guy, he found out the colonel liked Seinfeld, and so he started watching Seinfeld so he could have something to talk to the colonel about. I mean, that was the kind of moral authority this guy had where people almost worshipped him. I thought it was sick, quite frankly. But it was something that happened. Okay? Now, outside of the Army, you also have kinds of organizations that look like this. Think of GE. You know, Jack Welch created almost this cult of personality around himself, and then GE became almost a reflection of that personality. And Jack Welch is not unique. A lot of these famous CEOs that you see, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, a lot of these individuals, I think their power as a manager is their ability to have this cult of leadership, this cult of personality. What I am not saying is that they are inherently good or evil individuals. That's not, really part of this discussion. But what I am saying is that their kinds of behaviors and the way they have built an organization as managers encourages other people to try to emulate them in almost every single way. Emulate them in terms of work habits, personality, ideas, etc., etc. So this is the manager as almost like a moral force. Now, if we were to step outside classic business doctrine, well, we look at managers of moral authority. You actually see this in monism. Monism is a political science theory, and it basically says that every organization and every country needs someone to think and speak for the people. Think of like a king or a queen or a monarch. The Queen of England, yes, it's true, she's the head of the British Army, even though she almost never exercises that power. But she's also head of the Anglican Church, and she's kind of the embodiment of the British state. She's the representation of what it means to be British, right? You could argue that Vladimir Putin has tried to put that kind of image forth, right? The idea, now many Russians would vehemently disagree with that, right? We're just having a discussion here. It's not whether he is or is not the ideal Russian. It's that his propaganda machine portrays himself as the ideal Russian. The kind of person that everybody in Russia would want to emulate. That's the image that he wishes to portray. Okay? This is monism. And again, you do see this in organizations. Think again, Jack Welch, source of moral authority at GE. Statism is another one. And this is where instead of a person as this one with a big O, you're looking at the organization as the one with the big O. And so statism is almost like, one might say, the totalitarian worship of the state, worship of a government, almost worshiping an idea of America itself. Well, by the same token, you can also worship an organization in a way, and managers can create that. Gosh, even think of that movie, I think it was called The Interns. It had Vincent Vaughn and Owen Wilson, where they talked about how Google had this cult of personality, and as they were training these interns, as the managers were training these interns, they were creating this image of Google as some sort of force for moral good. And the fact that that movie was even created almost reinforces that idea. So it's not the idea, it's not that a person is this source of moral authority, but the corporation itself embodies these ideals, and every individual needs to adhere to that. Okay? And then we've also got monotheism, which most of you, if you're, for example, Christian, that's the belief in one God, and that one God is a source of moral authority. A big O. Okay? And we can also say, like, man is created in God's image. Well, we have the little ones here, and we try to live a good Christian life as God has intended us. Right? Now, one of the things that's key in this particular ontology is these little ones will never, ever be like the big one. There's always going to be some sort of a divide. The best worker in the world will never be like Jack Welch. There is that divide, but we want to strive for that. It kind of gives you that push. Now, some of you are thinking, well, how is this different than the dominance model? Okay? They're actually very similar. But the dominance model focuses on this idea that leaders have a right to almost exploit and exercise transactional relationships with those at the bottom of the pyramid. And those at the bottom of the pyramid could be workers in a firm, it could be poor customers that you're exploiting, it could be any sort of a societal actor that you're exploiting, either inside or outside the firm. In this particular ontology, what we're saying instead is know that within the firm, the manager exercises this moral authority and other people strive to emulate that moral authority. So it's not the fact that you amassed wealth that gives you the right to exploit people. That's the dominance model. What we're saying here is that the manager has kind of this responsibility to serve as that moral force. Now, this can of course be totally corrupted. People can behave in evil ways when they are the force for moral good. That's not the point. But what we are saying is that actually this manager can serve as this moral guide, if it were. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the next video. As always, hit that thumbs up and that subscribe. We'll talk about the differentiated individual ontology in the next video. See you then.